The 1960s and 70s were a time of protest, change, and growing anger. During this time, more and more people were starting to believe the government wasn't telling them the truth. They lost trust in the government, and people turned to music to say what leaders wouldn't. The Vietnam War was going on for a long time, around 20 years, and it costed over 58,000 American lives. As time went on, people began to ask, why are we really over there? In 1971, the truth came out when the Pentagon Papers got leaked by Daniel Ellsberg, which revealed that the U.S. government had secretly misled the public for years. Presidents from Truman to Nixon had all known the war wasn't going well, but kept sending troops there anyway. After that was Kent State. On May 4th, 1970, National Guard troops shot innocent college students protesting the war. 4 students were killed and 9 were injured. A few years later, the Watergate scandal destroyed what little trust was left. President Nixon's team had spied on political opponents. He tried to cover it up, but when he got caught, he became the first U.S. president to resign. While it was growing more and more clear that the government was willing to hide the truth, musicians were speaking it out loud and clear. Bob Dylan wrote songs that hit deep. In "Blowin' in the Wind," he asked, "How many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died?" Dylan's lyrics gave a voice to people questioning the war, racism, and injustice. John Lennon used music to fight for peace. His anthem, "Give Peace a Chance," was sung at rallies across the world. The U.S. government monitored Lennon, worried his songs might inspire more protests. Then came Jimi Hendrix. At Woodstock, he played a distorted version of the national anthem. Many people described it sounding like bombs dropping and people screaming, a protest without words echoing the chaos of war. Woodstock should be seen as more of a movement than a concert. In August 1969, nearly 500,000 people gathered in New York for 3 days of peace, love, and music. The government didn't just listen, they watched. Under a secret FBI program called COINTELPRO, or Counterintelligence Program, the government spied on artists like Dylan and Lennon. The FBI saw protest music as a threat and wanted to take it down. Protest music isn't just a thing of the past. Decades later, today, it is still alive and just as powerful. In 2015, Kendrick Lamar released All Right. The chorus, "We Gonna Be Alright," became a chant during Black Lives Matter marches. People call it a modern protest anthem. In 2018, Childish Gambino dropped This Is America. The video attached to this song was shocking for many people, filled with guns, violence, and symbolism. When truth is hidden, people speak out. When trust is lost, people seek out peace. And when words aren't enough, music steps in. It did in the 60s and it still does now.
Hello, my name is Olga and I am working. Come to the festival.
Clear air of Rishikesh, North India, the world-famous quartet stroll quietly in the lovely meditation retreat of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Flower-loving yogi told reporters that his brand of peace of mind could only be truly appreciated.
Starting with psychedelic counterculture to mainstream media, drug use has evolved from being locked down to being quite normalized, largely because of its influential figures in pop culture. While drugs have been used for as long as humans have walked the planet, for all different types of purposes, we're going to be focusing on the 60s to the early 2010s. The 60s were a wild time, lots of change in society and new outlooks on the world. These outlooks were being found by the use of psychedelics like LSD and mushrooms. One person who famously advocated to legalize spiritual discovery through the use of LSD was Timothy Leary, or Nixon's proclaimed most dangerous man in America. He was a Harvard psychologist turned LSD advocate. You might also know him from his quote, "Turn on, tune in, drop out," in 1967 at the Human Be In, a San Francisco hippie rally that protested a California law outlawing the use of LSD. He promoted LSD as a path of enlightenment and self-discovery, helping transform psychedelics from scientific curiosity into a symbol of freedom and rebellion. Many of Leary's followers were young hippies who stood by what he said and were upset with materialism and conformity. They believed that the current system was critically flawed and didn't allow for safe expression of identity. They ethically used drugs like LSD and marijuana as a way of opening their minds and gaining spirituality, freedom, and enlightenment. They believed that because psychedelics were so restricted by society, the ideas that lie behind them would help challenge modern values and fix complex issues. One can make comparisons to other cultures when talking about psychedelics. and how the use of drugs for enlightenment can be seen throughout all of history. If anything, the political and social pushback against drug use is the strange concept. Festivals like Woodstock symbolize this intersection of music, peace, and drug use, and of course, cultural acceptance. Woodstock is a key moment in history where drug-related counterculture becomes organized and somewhat normalized. While the key point of the hippie movement was to go against mainstream society, the ideology was becoming even more common and even more powerful.
How did Pink Floyd set out? Were you originally a rock band and you moved into the electronic thing? How did it all begin?
Hard to remember. Yes, gosh, it was a long time ago. We just played for fun when we were at college.
We played for fun and we played R&B.
Now comes the 70s. There's a shift from psychedelics to harder substances like heroin and cocaine. Young adults didn't know who to trust, nor what to do, so they sought out someone to follow. While this happened in the 50s and 60s as well, it's different in the 70s because drug use became the norm in the authentic rock experience. It was a way to rebel, suffer, and create. Famous artists' deaths were romanticized as the idea of the tragic artist became more popular. Some examples of artists who are looked at this way are Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. Their drug use was as well known as their music. It was a symbol of their rebellion, but it also brought out the worst in them. Each of them died from drug-related causes, and many of these artists died at the young age of 27, causing a rising stigma with the dangers of celebrity drug use. This is often referred to as the 27 Club.
Do you like parties?
Yeah.
Here comes rolling out the 1980s. The romanticization of substances versus the generations of stigma built up around their use was still a controversial and very public dispute. MTV became a platform to show artists wealth, rebellion, sex, and partying, which had a huge influence on youth culture. By this time, record labels and investors had realized the marketability of the lifestyle. Rather than it being counterculture, it had become part of the mainstream culture itself. And while most weren't inspired by this drug use, they were enamored by the idea of the miserable, dopamine-fueled rock star. Labels saw this obsession and capitalized on it, pushing out a new wave of safely alternative rock stars like Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue. Wild enough to spark interest, but no genuine challenge of societal norms. Fake rebellion. Proving the point that capitalism will devour and transmute every attempt to take it down. By the mid-1980s, crack cocaine had flooded the urban communities across the U.S., igniting a public health crisis and sparking media panic. The crack epidemic wasn't just about drugs, it also exposed racial and economic disparities, and shaped how America viewed addiction. Rock stars were held as troubled geniuses while inner-city users were labeled as criminals. When addiction was ugly, it was no longer as fun to watch someone die. So society placed some addicts on pedestals and others behind bars. The 1990s took a darker and more introspective turn on drugs. Gone were the flashy music videos of the 80s glamorizing the use of drugs. Instead, artists in genres like grunge and hip-hop began talking about drugs not as a symbol of rebellion or luxury, but as part of pain, addiction, and survival. Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of Nirvana, didn't hide his heroin use. It combined with the sadness and alienation his music reflected. Unlike the rock stars of the past, Cobain's drug use wasn't glamorized, it was a symptom of something deeper. This ended tragically for him. There are other cases similar artists experienced, some being Daniel Johnston, Elliott Smith, and Pearl Jam. All of these artists were influential in their own way, inspiring each other, drawing from each other, and spreading the deep, dark, murky truths behind the music scene and behind society as a whole. At the same time as these artists, hip-hop artists brought the realities of drugs into the mainstream. For many, drug use and or dealing wasn't about partying, it was about getting by. Rappers like Tupac, Nas, and Biggie Smalls talked about crack addiction and poverty from first-hand experience. Meanwhile, in other corners of youth culture, ecstasy and ketamine became a drug of choice in the underground raves. It was used not to escape but to connect. It was to feel closer to others through music and shared experience. And while glamorization of hard drugs like this is a difficult topic, it is still useful to see the positives and negatives of drug culture. By the 2000s, drug use had become fully woven into the fabric of pop culture. No longer shocking, just expected. The media's obsession with celebrity breakdowns brought addiction into the spotlight, often more as entertainment than concern. Tabloids documented the downfall of stars like Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan, and Paris Hilton, turning drug-related scandals into headlines for public consumption by news agencies like the New York Post, TMZ, and Daily Mail. Rehab wasn't a private matter either. It was a part of the narrative of these celebrities. People like to watch them try to succeed and yet fail and fail again to escape their drug addictions. While most of the blame was left on the record producers and people handling these celebrities, you have to think the people watching and laughing or gossiping are just as to blame. While they don't have direct control over the celebrities' lives, it still shows the danger in glamorizing and making entertainment out of the darkest parts of culture. While these very real stories were used for entertainment, television and film began portraying drugs with greater nuance. In the 2000s, a clear increase in drug-related media can be found. With loosening stigma around drugs, it was no longer a subject of strict taboo. While these shows didn't romanticize hard drug use, it acknowledged the realities of the world and allowed for humanity to be seen in addicts and dealers. Making ends meet is hard, and while a drug dealer is making the world a worse place, their motivations are still human, and their actions don't make them the devil. Shows like Weeds and Breaking Bad are great examples of this humanity being brought through a clear, unmotivated perspective. Unlike previous decades where drugs represented rebellion, enlightenment, or even despair, the 2000s marked a shift towards normalization. Drug use was part of daily life, from coping mechanisms to party essentials. The culture was becoming more desensitized to the dangers of drug use and more focused on its aesthetic and social value.
Deal with this problem. I am glad that in this administration we have increased the amount of money for handling the problem of dangerous drugs sevenfold. It will be $600 million this year. More money will be needed.
DARE was a government-funded program launched in 1983, where police officers educated children in schools about the negative effects of drug use. The demonization and social ridicule tactics deployed by DARE were meant to turn kids away from drugs, but the long-term effect of the program is very minimal, often making people feel more comfortable about their first use when they realize it wasn't nearly as bad as the officers told them in the classroom. If the effects aren't immediate, then it's harder for people who had been through the DARE program to see the downsides of using. The effect demonstrated here is called the disconfirmation effect, or when expectations don't meet the reality you were told, and it creates disillusionment. Casting such harsh stereotypes and bold claims about drugs ruined the DARE group's credibility for most Americans, further pushing the idea among young adults that drug use may not be all that bad. Another campaign that attempted to demolish drug culture used the slogan, "This is your brain on drugs," paired with many troubling videos, most commonly associated with the video of an egg frying. Launched in 1987, 4 years after DARE, the goal of this campaign was to scare young adults nearing the age where they may feel motivated to use. This campaign is often seen as yet another failure in the war on drugs, oversimplifying the issues of drug addiction and feeding into the same disconfirmation effect that DARE fell victim to. While these two attacks on drug culture demonstrate how the government used cultural messaging to fight against drugs, Other important things to recognize are the enforcements of drug-related policies through the legal system. In 1986, the government issued an Anti-Drug Abuse Act that outlawed certain drugs and gave police more political tools to help catch drug users and dealers. Around the time, the amount of people who have been taken into custody for hard drug possession, especially crack cocaine, increased by over 800%, from 50,000 to 400,000. These policies led to over-policing and over-arresting of minorities and low-income communities through roundabout rules. A clear example of how the discrimination of drug laws may have targeted lower-income areas is the rule around drug-free zones. This made it so that drug use in areas like residential housing or nearby schools would be seen as more of a serious crime, adding extra years onto your sentence. This was extremely damaging to poorer communities where the only public places available are places found under this drug-free zone category. The legal system being so expensive to participate in often led to people caught with drug use facing up to 3 times the amount of sentencing as someone richer would have. The controversial word at the time, and still today, was probable cause, giving police the right to search or detain people they suspected of committing a crime, such as carrying drugs. The under-enforcement of this rule led to discrimination in the legal system, police arresting mostly minorities, thus feeding into further negative stereotypes about minorities and drug use. Instead of being provided healthy ways to overcome drug addiction, people caught were directly punished and ripped away from what they had become dependent on. People being caught often wished they were clean for a while, but the current system views them as a lost cause, even after just one use. Funding punishment and ineffective preventive measures instead of supporting rehabilitation and treatment for those already hurt is one of the government's biggest flaws in the war on drugs. The government's performative war on drugs shows how it prioritizes its public image over actually effective solutions. The government's not attempting to genuinely fix these issues. It just wants to seem like it cares so that the people view them as the hero against drugs. The root causes of addiction were often left unchecked and unfixed, likely because of the work and funding that would need to go into fixing them, and the admission that the government was wrong all this time. These memorable gestures attempt to turn the country against the user rather than the system, and forces the user into an even darker spot, thus making the public view them as even less redeemable. It's important to point out that the government hasn't done absolutely nothing. When comparing the American government's handling of drug issues to other countries where there is less rules, illegal use and addiction is much more common in all social classes, especially the lower ones. The government hasn't failed entirely, but criticism of the system is crucial for development and recognition of its faults. Calling out flaws in the government isn't pointing out that you're not grateful for what it's done. It's just pointing out that you want some things to be changed and that some things must change for the betterment of everyone. Subscribe to John Michael Online on YouTube. This is T-Dog signing out.
You've got to press it on you. You've got to move it.